first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon Sûl, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west in the days of the Last Alliance. I'm guest co-host Richard Barrett, and you are listening to the Amon Sûl podcast.
Auroria Christo, aurories, or my Govanen, but we should say Christ is risen. So, welcome to Amon Sûl.
Truly, he is risen.
Welcome to Amon Sûl, a podcast for tall hobbits with elvish aspirations. I'm Father Anthony, an Orthodox Christian priest, and here we talk about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien because we love them and believe in their power to orient us toward what is highest and noblest. Today, my guest co-host is Richard Barrett. Richard is the Director of Publications for Capella Romana, but he was the Executive Director of Ages Initiatives when I first got to know him. He has a lot of projects as the Artistic Director and co-founder of the St. John of Damascus Society and the Director of Music at Holy Dormition Greek Orthodox Church in Somerville, Massachusetts. He is an accomplished chanter, and he sings regularly with ensembles such as Capella Romana, the St. Tikhon Choir, Psaltikon, and the Archdiocesan Byzantine Choir of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. He has also taught a number of aspiring chanters and helped them prepare for certification, which is how I first really got to know him. Besides all that, he's done a fair bit of academic work in ancient history and musical and liturgical topics, and he is pretty much a very bright cookie. He was also
That's on my business card.
He was also a previous guest co-host for episode 15 back in December of 2019, the episode called Mary Sang in This World Below, which is frankly one of my favorite episodes from our back catalog. And he also joined me and others last month for our impromptu Paschal episode. It is an honor to know you, Richard, and a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. So, welcome back to Amon Sûl.
Many thanks for the invitation. It's great to be back. Under the new management, even. The old new management, I suppose.
Same boss, same as the old boss, or something like that. At least I didn't call myself Father Andrew this time. I think I did that 2 episodes ago, and 3 episodes ago. Father Paul Hodge said, "You just called yourself Father Andrew." I'm like, no. But anyway,
A-N followed by a dental.
Yeah. There's. I've been called Father Andrew before. Just I never did it to myself. But anyway, I really appreciate too, Richard, you coming in very last minute and talking through the Paschal stuff last month. That
was fun.
In lieu of doing this, but now we get to actually proceed with this. So, on our episode today, Richard and I will be discussing Chapter 5, called A Conspiracy Unmasked, and hopefully we'll also... Hopefully we'll continue the reflections that you began with Father Andrew several years ago. But before we do that, we need to do the introductory stuff. So I know you answered this question before, but it's been a while. So would you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you first came to connect with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien?
Sure. Let's see, a little bit about myself. I'm trying to think if there's anything particularly interesting about me that goes beyond what you said already. Let's see. I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I spent 11 years in the Midwest for purposes of my wife and I going to grad school, and then we landed in the Northeast about 11 years ago, and hopefully we're buried here. And we have 2 gorgeous kids, and I don't know. That's really all there is to say about that. I owe most of what I know about language to my wife, who is a brilliant philologist and a Germanic specialist at that. So she did Germanic philology in her graduate work, doing Gothic and Old English and Old Norse, and as well as Latin and modern Norwegian and modern German,
And all the things you do.
and all the things you do. So she can essentially read Tolkien in the original
How
Tolkien.
does she feel about Tolkien, though? Is she big on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually so moving on to the connecting with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. So my earliest memory, as I said all those years ago, of Tolkien was seeing the Rankin Bass Return of the King on television, probably when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5.
Right.
And the so I don't particularly remember the song "Where There's a Whip There's a Way," but I'm sure I heard it somewhere. And then I had one of those kind of cassette storybooks of the Rankin Bass Hobbit, where the storybook had, pictures from the animated movie, and then they had a very, very condensed version on cassette of
Right.
an imitation, let's say, of the voice track of the movie, because it most certainly was not the voice track of the movie.
Interesting. A copyright thing, I'm sure, but
probably, or licensing
and
thing.
that original Rankin Bass Hobbit, I feel has had something of a resurgence in popularity, and finding itself appreciated by the fan base, maybe especially after the live action catastrophe of a few years ago.
Yeah, perhaps. There's so much I can say about the live action Hobbit that. There's a wonderful YouTube series by what is her name, Lindsay. I'm blanking on. I'll come up with it so you can put it in the show notes. But
Sure.
it's essentially a what the heck happened deep dive into the Hobbit movies, and it's really, really interesting. But be that as it may. And then eventually I read The Hobbit, and I remember seeing seeing a stage version of The Hobbit
That's
at
fun.
at Seattle Children's Theater, if I remember correctly. And
I'm sure that would have been very much adapted and shortened just for children's theater, but still, that would be a fun production to do.
It was. It was fun to see, and it's a very treasured memory of mine. And then in junior high, I started reading Lord of the Rings, and I had the experience that I would later have with the Silmarillion, which is I kind of started it, ran out of steam. Started it again a little while later, got a little further, ran out of steam, and kind of wash, rinse, repeat, getting a little farther each time, and then finally I was able to get through it. But it still took me about 6 months to get through it the first time.
Sure.
And meanwhile, I was a voracious reader in junior high, but I had there was something about it where I just really struggled with. I really struggled with the tone or the register or something, and especially since I had friends who were telling me, "Oh yeah, I can get through the whole thing in a weekend." There was something I found very frustrating about the experience, but ultimately I did finally get through it, and then I started the Silmarillion, and had the same experience. Only in that case, it took me about 16 years finally to finish it once and for all. But it stuck with me, and I was excited about the Peter Jackson movies, most definitely. And so in the run up to the Peter Jackson movies, my wife and I actually read the entirety of Lord of the Rings aloud to each other.
That's a beautiful experience.
Yeah, and so it took us about a year for each book, to be sure.
Sure.
But it was a fantastic experience.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's my wife is very much a Tolkien fan as well, and she appreciates it on a level that I can only be a poser for, essentially, in terms of her linguistic appreciation.
Well, maybe I have to ask you to put in a good word for this and inquire whether she would be willing to come on as a guest host / guest expert at some point in the future, because
She might.
I would love that.
Sure, I can. We can work on that. I think she'd have. She'd have a lot to say, especially about the Gothic and Old English part, and I think she might also have things to say about the inspiration drawn from like the Edda and
Sure,
things of this nature.
sure. Maybe for some of the Rohirrim episodes, but maybe even also before. So, very good.
Absolutely.
Very good. Or maybe for a Bree. Anyway, we can talk about that. But
Yes.
very good. All right. Anyway, thank you. That's more than we got out of you last time, and I'm glad to hear the more detail. Now, we often ask about how you personally interact with Tolkien's works, but you answered that as well last time. So instead, I want to ask if you can just share a brief summary of your thoughts, your thesis from last time about music and poetry in The Lord of the Rings, and what Tolkien
Sure.
is telling us each time these things show up, like a crib sheet for your last appearance, or a teaser.
Yeah. Well, I it's been a long time since I had that conversation with Father Andrew, but the gist of it is that the Silmarillion makes a very, very clear statement at the beginning that creation is that Eru, God, sings creation into being, and we know from Tolkien's own writings that there is a sense that he has a sort of framework he applies of this idea of subcreation, right? That anytime we engage in a creative act as humans, we are imitating or participating in the the creative powers of God, right? So my hypothesis, my sort of fanciful idea that I threw out a few years ago, was that when we see characters singing, making music, and so on in Lord of the Rings, there is some way that this is telling us God is intervening in the action here, and there's there's more I can say here about, or that I will get to, sort of about the difference between the Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings in terms of how we see the divine powers interacting and engaging in the narrative. There's sort of the Homerian approach of the Silmarillion, and then the more like Herodotean or Thucydidean approach of
Sure.
Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
But that we can perhaps take one way or the other as a clue when a character is singing, that there's some way that the character is invoking the divine, is bringing divine powers into the action.
Sure. And I'm assuming...
And participating in.
Right, because music is a collaborative act, a harmonious act, or a discordant act. So there's an element of how is the free will of the individual interacting with the will of the one as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I am excited to get to talk about all of that with you, especially in this chapter and really these chapters. So... Anyway, very good. Before we get to that conversation, though, we need to get to some of our listener questions and comments. And the following is actually the first time on the show that we're going to read an email that is addressed to me and not to Father Andrew or Richard Rowland, or rather, we should say Deacon Seraphim Axios.
That was the Richard. That was the Richard who was referenced.
That was the other Richard. Yes.
It was like, wait a minute. there was somewhere in the script where I saw that and was like, no, that I didn't say that.
Fortunately, he decided to resolve the ambiguity and just become a deacon, so that now we're safe. But
I wish he had kept Richard as his ordained name, but
there are a lot of seraphims and paisi and yeah, but oh well. We'll have to ask him sometime whether he'll still go by Richard. But yes. Anyway, so this is a letter that I got from listener Sophie back in January. Would you read this to us, Richard?
Sure. Dear Father Anthony, who I am not. I am a longtime listener of Amon Sûl, a cherished podcast as it revolves around J.R.R. Tolkien's work and the faith he so loved, a faith that means all the world to me. I am very pleased that you are now at the helm of this endeavor, and I have enjoyed your episodes very, very much. The most recent one with Dr. Cyril Jenkins was full of gold nuggets. They would take a long time to mine. So wonderful. Thank you. I would like to focus on one thing you and Dr. Jenkins commented on, something that in my reading of The Lord of the Rings had escaped me. Not its fact, but its significance. That is, that Gollum was a hobbit. Tolkien could have brought in some other race or creature or being for that role, but he chose, judiciously, to reveal him as a hobbit. This connection between hero and a villain, a saint and a sinner, is worth keeping in mind and helps to hone our conscience. We are so near to being that which we most despise, so on the brink of failure, but for the grace of God, so weak in our perceived strength. How easy we, I should say I, find it to set evil apart as if it belongs elsewhere and has no claim on us. One prays that it is so, and by prayer are saved, but Tolkien reminds us of our vulnerability, and, as importantly, the vulnerability of others, so that we might be merciful. I must admit that I still find it hard to feel any sympathy for Gollum, but that is my failing, and Tolkien has done all he can to elicit compassion, while not vacillating in calling out evil for what it is and pointing us toward goodness. In many ways, Tolkien's treatment of this issue reminds me of Solzhenitsyn's wise words, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts." This line shifts. Inside us, it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And that quote is from the Gulag Archipelago. Again, thank you for your excellent work. I look forward to every coming episode with eager anticipation. All good things, Sophia.
So I really appreciated that letter, not least because it was addressed to me, but also the insight and, the pulling in of the Solzhenitsyn, quotation there.
Sure.
And really, I appreciate almost above all how she shares and articulates that light bulb moment of realization when she recognizes the significance of Gollum being a corrupted hobbit. And it's a deeply challenging realization. It hits hard every time I read it, even though I know it's coming. But I think her reflections on that line, separating good and evil, connects to the music of the Ainur, the music of Ilúvatar, and the themes of Eru, and the decision that comes to every creature, whether to sing in harmony or to rebel and go our own way. And I thought it was a good place for us to start today. But what are your thoughts, Richard?
Yeah. This isn't directly related to music, but when she talks about still finding it hard to feel any sympathy for Gollum, a character whom I am hard pressed to characterize as ever exactly repenting.
Yeah.
It reminds me of to invoke a different sort of fantastic universe. It reminds me of sort of what some people characterize as the Darth Vader problem, which, okay, so we're supposed to buy that all is forgiven with with this evil monster who murdered billions just because he rescued his son. And it's like, well, we have to draw a line, I suppose. We have to draw a distinction between, I don't know, forgiveness and consequences, I suppose, as well as sort of this idea of, redeemed in whose eyes, right? In who and Gollum, I don't think is in any meaningful way redeemed.
No.
But we can still feel sympathy for him without that making what he does okay, right?
Right.
The point with Gollum is not that is not that we're supposed to, I don't know, see him as ultimately fundamentally good.
No.
But we are supposed to see him as, in two ways, sort of there, but for the grace of God go we, right? And that also the point is that even in his corruption, he still has a part to play in the end. His actions still wind up being used for the good.
Sure.
So it's how we whether or not we have sympathy for Gollum. I think that depends on sort of what we mean by that, I suppose.
Sure.
Sympathy doesn't have to mean that everything he does is okay. It doesn't have to mean that, oh, it's all good, right? That's not what that has to mean.
It may mean simply we recognize there is still a fragment of that splintered light that Verlin Flieger talks about. That there is, in Christian terms, there is still the image of God is still present in one who is corrupted, even if it is almost entirely obscured. The story is not over. They are not completely irredeemable. But as you say, there still must be consequences. And maybe the capacity for sympathy, for recognizing that for love is itself a sign of sanctity. Of holiness and greatness. It's only Gandalf who really perceives that in Gollum here at the beginning. Frodo comes to see it towards the end after he's carried that burden. But I think the problems with Gollum are not just the big sins, the murder of Diagol and the and the betrayal of Frodo are the two great crimes that we see of him, but also the banal and mundane, or what he treats as banal and mundane, what Gandalf describes, as the terror of the woodman, the dark figure that sneaks into windows and steals from cradles. And we understand that, not to make it too explicit, that Gollum has lived off of eating babies. For all of his long years. There's a lot of, he's not just this cute creature that is stealing fish from, from the pool. There is a depth of utter loathsomeness, not even loathsome, utter evil, in Gollum, that, and that's why perhaps it's challenging to still see him functioning in a relational, in a cute, in a sympathetic way.
I had a thought when you were talking about that. With the idea of the banality of evil. Just I'm thinking of Gandalf's description of what he was originally like as Smeagol, right? The most inquisitive and curious-minded of that family was called Smeagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds, and he ceased to look up at the hilltops or the leaves on trees or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward. There's something. There was a fundamental part of him even before the ring showed up, where he's thinking back to what you just said about music being a communal act, there's something antisocial about him, right?
Yeah.
Except for his friendship with Deagle.
Which is also still characterized by domination, control, and what can I get out of you? Give us that, Deagle, right?
Right. And I don't think it's going too. I'm sure this isn't a new observation. I don't think it's going too far to say that there's an image here of Cain and Abel, right?
Sure.
And with Smeagol very much being the Cain.
No doubt.
But yeah, I mean, there's something that was there already that the ring just took advantage of,
right?
In Smeagol's personality,
he's already functioning as, in a microcosmic way, an image of Melkor. He wants his own thing. He wants to control it himself. He wants to take it apart and do what he wants with it. He's not willing to take part in the great song. Yeah. Anyway, Sophia, thank you for that letter, and please write again. So, for our second listener comment, then, we're going to draw from the Amon Sûl Orthodox Tolkien group and a response to our episode last month, our Paschal Extravaganza, because in the course of our conversation, Richard, we talked about how this month we were going to read chapter 5 and would face the challenge of interpreting the silliness, maybe it's not silly, of the Bath Song as connected with the music of Iluvatar. So, fairly newly ordained Axios, Father David Thompson, posted the following. He says, Father Anthony, the Bath Song is obviously a reference to the baptism of the Lord. Washing the weary mud away is the recreation/renewing of human nature and all creation that Christ accomplishes in the water hot, that is, the holy water of the Jordan. And being filled so with God such that springs of water flow out of one's belly is recalled in the fountains white beneath the sky, water that smokes and steams, that spreads far beyond its given container like the never-ending grace of Theosis in Jesus. So that's what he said.
It is indeed what he said.
What do you think, Richard? Is he on the right track, or is that just some bright week silliness, or maybe a little of both?
Well, okay, so the presence of heat and fire and whatnot, especially in Syriac literature, is definitely an image of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so we can I can go with this to a certain extent. Now, if we take the text as a whole, I'm going to read the whole thing.
Very good.
Okay? Sing hey for the bath at close of day that washes the weary mud away. A loon is he that will not sing. Oh, water hot is a noble thing. Okay, so there, in that first of 4 verses, we have the first sort of image we have of water is mixed with the earth, right? It's we have mud.
Sure.
Okay, and then that's contrasted with the water of the bath. Okay. Then second verse. Oh, sweet is the sound of falling rain and the brook that leaps from hill to plain. But better than rain or rippling streams is water hot that smokes and steams. Okay, there we have water in nature, right? We have water in its in its more or less pure forms that we experience as functions of the weather.
Sure.
The rain. We have the moving water,
and no doubt calling to mind, in Tolkien's mind, the water of Ulmo that is always a vessel of the intervention of the Valar in the Silmarillion that would be present.
Yep, sure. So then, third verse. Oh, water cold we may pour at need down a thirsty throat and be glad indeed. But better is beer if drink we lack, and water hot poured down the back. Okay, so now we have water in the forms that we use it for, right? We have water as a form of sustenance, and then even a step further, a water that we apply some sort of craft to,
right? With the mediation of human intervention.
Yeah, and so a kind of subcreation, right? So the beer. And then finally, last verse. Oh, water is fair that leaps on high in a fountain white beneath the sky. But never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet. So now we have the fountain white beneath the sky, right? And there are maybe a couple different ways we could take that. Maybe that's a cloud. But one way or the other, there's an elevation here, right? There's an elevated image of water. So from verse to verse, I think, and I mean this seriously, there is a progression in terms of how he describes water.
Sure.
Right. And there are different functions of water, and each verse seems to imply a higher function.
Sure, there's
right. There's the water in the form where we want to get rid of it. There's the water in the form we encounter it. There's the water in the form that we use it, and then there's the water that in some form or another we look up to. Right. So is that baptism? I don't know. Maybe, but I think there is a way that he is he is describing different aspects of it, high and low.
I think that's excellent. I have almost nothing to add to that. Well, no, I do need to add the one thing. Me arguing against it being a reference to baptism, but I think doing no violence to your reflections is the requirement of the didache that the baptismal water should be cold. Running water and cold water, and you're only allowed to use warm water if you don't have any cold water, which presumes that we're talking about potentially baptizing in a Roman bath, perhaps.
Yeah. But we are talking typography here rather than allegory.
Sure.
And to the extent that hot water is a type of water infused with the Holy Spirit.
Sure. The fervor of the of the Holy Spirit, as
exactly.
as the priest says. Yeah. Anyway.
So baptism. I don't know exactly, but I do think there is more to the song than it just being a whimsical moment.
Sure. And as we'll see moving on, this is one of the poems that Tolkien workshopped. That there are poems that effectively appear in the first draft and they survive basically unchanged from the first draft to the last. But this is not one of those things. This one is played with. So
and there's also a whole other level of conceit here that I'll get to down the road.
Very good, because we're only just beginning. So before we move on, I have to note that Father David seems to have, by far, the most complete collection of Tolkien-related music I've ever seen. There was a request way back in August, July or August of 2023, where I think Deacon Seraphim, Richard, requested listeners to send their favorite Tolkien-related music through, and Father David sent a very lengthy set of suggestions, including the San Luis Obispo Symphonies, Middle Earth, and the Tolkien Ensemble, and Glass Hammer, and then a number of other things. So if anyone's interested in seeing Father David's full list, please just send through a note by email or on the Facebook page. The email address is amonsûl@ancientfaith.com, and ask for it, and we'll either send it through to you by email or just post it in the show notes, perhaps. And if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to send those through as well, and you may well hear it on an episode to come. And that is it for listener comments and questions. So, this brings us to the main portion of our episode today, the big discussion, which we're actually going to divide into two parts. I asked Richard to come on the podcast to talk about A Conspiracy Unmasked, but before we do that, as we've gone through the previous chapters, we've basically done the worst possible thing that we always tell readers not to do, and we've skipped the poetry. So now we're going to go back and read all of the poetry and song that Tolkien has given us in these early chapters, because it's really important. And Richard, you've basically carved out for yourself the I am the expert on this, because you're the one who insisted that it's important.
Good Lord. Said nobody ever.
Well, at least you've undertaken to say this matters. We should pay attention to it, because, as you said, all the poetry and songs should be read as a callback to the music of the Ainur and the creation of the cosmos. So, I'd like to start by asking you if you've had any particular thoughts about the way in which the poetry of the early chapters functions with respect to that thesis of yours.
Sure. The one of the other things that I think is really important about the poetry and the songs, especially in these early chapters, because these early chapters are really setting the table, right? These early chapters are really doing the world building. They're establishing the themes. They are kind of they're establishing the normal that has to be interrupted by the inciting incident, right?
Sure.
As it were, of Frodo needing to leave with the ring. And to that extent, there's a very real sense of the songs and the poetry. They do a lot of the cultural world building, right? They establish kind of things that are important. They establish things that are they establish sort of the rhythm of life that gets marked with music. They establish ways that they function very much as a communal thing, right? This is the hobbits are established as having really their own distinct singing culture in a lot of respects,
right?
And everybody, I mean, every culture in Middle Earth, for the most part, except trying to, I guess even the orcs to an extent, have some kind of singing culture,
which doesn't militate in either case against the thesis. Rather, I think it becomes a natural part of it. Everyone is in relationship. Well, I should let you say it, but
yeah. Well, it's there's this is some way in which the going with my idea, there's some way in which that imprint is never lost. That imprint of the image of God is never lost. It may be directed this way or that. It may be made ugly, but it's never completely wiped away. Maybe I'm thinking here. Does Gollum ever sing?
Yes,
he does in the movie. Does he in the book?
I believe he does. I think the song about the fish, so juicy sweet. Okay. That is
in the book.
It is in the book.
Yes. Okay.
You couldn't make that up. You wouldn't think to make that up. I think.
Okay. Then so and the. And it says something about the communities. It says something about what's important to these cultures, so on and so forth. So the fact that there's a bath song, the fact that there's a walking song, the fact that there's and that there are drinking songs, and the interesting detail about the bath song, coming back to that, is that it's one of several that are being sung, right? Everybody is singing a different one, and then Pippin's voice is the one that's loudest. And so that speaks to there being a body of repertoire of bath songs,
right?
So all these things are important, and the so that was something that really struck me this time around about how poetry is functioning. That it's it says something. It describes aspects of these various cultures that are communal, that are important, that are seasonal, rhythmic, if you like.
Right. And it just the thought has come to me about Gollum specifically. He's at his best. He's at his most hobbitish. He's at his least corrupted
Yes.
when he's singing. And what because
Yep.
and I wonder if you could even say, having possessed the ring so long, it consumed, it used up all of Gollum's capacity to be at his worst. All that's left of him is hunger, which sometimes leads him to that banal, mundane horror of infant cannibalism, but also sometimes just leaves him to sing a song about a fish. A sinless joy that he's still able to participate in. And it's one almost wonders, is he partly potentially redeemable, not least because so much of what is the worst of him has been consumed, and all that he's left with is the basic desires, not the base desires, but the essential needs that potentially humanize, and yet we see him rejecting those. It makes the conversation about taters all of a sudden really a weighty thing, but we'll have to talk about that down the line when we get to it. But
Sure.
anyway.
Sure.
Anything else you want to say about the poetry in general, since I interrupted you?
In general, no. I think that's that's sort of the big umbrella for me right now.
Sure. Then with that said, let's look at each of these songs and poems in full and where they fit in the larger story. So we start with chapter 1, The Long Expected Party, in which there's actually only one poem, and it's the first appearance of The Road Goes Ever On and On. So I think there are two things to note here, just in terms of its context. First, importantly, it comes immediately after Bilbo finally gives up the ring. It's the first time he sings, when he no longer is possessing the thing. And second, that this song, this poem, shows up multiple times throughout the whole book. And to that, I want to note that Bilbo's feet pursuing the road are eager, but that word changes later when Frodo reprises the poem. So, Richard, would you read this most Tolkienian of poems to us, and then tell us what you think about it?
Sure. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. One of the things that really occurs to me this time around is how un-hobbitish this is. Hobbits don't really travel, right? Hobbits don't really go anywhere. Hobbits stay close to home. This is the whole point.
Yeah.
And so here's a traveling song by a hobbit. So this is there is something here. Part of the point of Lord of the Rings kind of seems to be that this is maybe the first step towards hobbits being there's sort of the discussion about in the prologue about hobbits. Well, they still exist, but you just can't see them,
Right.
but there also seems to be the implication that in some form or another they're reintegrated back into humanity, and maybe this is the first step along, so to speak, along that path.
Oh, interesting.
Like Bilbo going out into the world, that sets things in motion that can't be undone. Certainly, they can't be undone for Frodo, but in terms of the barrier being broken between hobbits and the rest of Middle Earth.
Sure.
That's once that membrane is pierced, it can't be unpierced.
Right.
And I wonder if that's to a certain extent what this is about.
Sure. And of course, hobbits are not an unalloyed good in Tolkien's perspective.
They're tricksters.
They're tricksters, but also they're hidebound, closed-minded, parochial, they would never ever climb a tower just for the sake of seeing the sea. Right. And that gets repeated multiple times. And I wonder if this isn't, in musical terms, hobbits are kind of, when I was playing in an orchestra, I was a cellist, so I played a lot of bum ba ba da da bum ba ba da da bum ba ba da da, especially in pits, and we're playing just the vamp while the chorus on the stage gets their act together. But this is the theme where the bass mundane gets a chance to actually step out and take the theme. And it functions as a musical transition. Now we're stepping out and going somewhere.
And where many paths and errands meet. I mean, the busyness implied by errands, that also strikes me as being very un-hobbitish.
Right. But an errand is also a calling, a responsibility that one takes up, and where from there we don't know, because we're following, perhaps we're following the direction of someone else. Anyway, I think we're looking at it. We're seeing two different things, but also seeing the same thing here.
Yeah. Well, and whether then I cannot say. So there's there's the sense of unknown, the sense of the unknown,
right?
And that you're kind of giving up some control of your destiny,
right?
That's there's a way in which the bigger world. There's a sense in which the bigger world is intruding. Mm-hmm. There's also a sense in which, the Hobbit world is seeping out. Right.
And in both cases, there is an act of submission, submission to the road, submission to the call, to the guidance, whatever the errand. Anyway, yeah, I think this is more important than I had ever really processed.
Well, it is one of the major themes here. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it expresses it really in a very subtle way, mm-hmm. right? You just sort of take it as Bilbo's wistful musings. Okay, I guess it's on to a new chapter for me. But to the extent that Bilbo is kind of the hobbitish innocence, mm-hmm. That has to, that can only change so much, and then it's Frodo who has to go right. farther, right?
Right, and it's important that Bilbo sings this right after he's given up the ring. I right. have to underscore that, because this is the point where Bilbo has given up the ring, and then he's able to sing. Then he's given up control. Then he's given mm-hmm. up the domination and the mastery that he's enjoyed. He's been the master of all he surveys and done mm-hmm. good with it. Even as we say that the elves did good with their, capacity from the rings to preserve the beauty of the elder days. But now Bilbo's given it up, and now he's eager to do something new, to mm-hmm. leave behind that comfort.
And the comfort and the control,
but because they come together.
Yeah,
he even as in the old Hobbit, he was always yearning for his safe, comfortable Hobbit hole when he was out of control. But that was when he did the remarkable things.
Yeah.
So, all right. So then we come to the Shadow of the Past, which only has one poem in it, and that is the ring verse itself. So for this, I want to note the question that arose during my discussion with Cyril Jenkins, and that is the question of whose voice is the ring verse written in? So my thesis at the time was that it has to be Sauron's voice, since it's on the ring that only his hands made. But I'm curious what you think, Richard. So I'll read this, and then you can start by telling us what you think about it. So, 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie.
Yeah. I had never really thought about whose voice it would have to be in before I saw the question posed here. I think probably it makes sense that it has to be Sauron's voice, I suppose. But here, this is the interesting thing here, and this is part of the conceit about all of the poetry in Lord of the Rings. And I have more to say about it now, more to say about this aspect now than I would have 5.5 years ago. There's the sort of general meta conceit of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is that this is a translation of a manuscript that was found, right? I'll have more to say about this part later. But the Hobbit is the part of the Red Book that was written by Bilbo. Lord of the Rings is, for the most part, the part of the Red Book that was written by Frodo or compiled by Frodo, depending on how you look at it.
Right.
And then the very, very last part is the part that was written by Sam. And you have the moment. You have the moment in the book where it's very, very clearly handed off to Sam.
With the Silmarillion being Bilbo's translations from the Elvish.
Right. So then you have another layer where this is poetry that was written in the Black Speech of Mordor, translated poetically into English, presumably walked through
the Westron, right?
Westron, right? So this is a translator's poetic translation of a translator's poetic translation,
right?
So
it's a little bit of a game of telephone going on here.
There's a little bit of a game of telephone going on here, and I think we have to, and obviously this is all ridiculous because presumably Tolkien wrote this in English originally, but nonetheless, this is sort of the umbrella conceit over the whole work,
right?
So we to that extent, it's like if we're going to go there with whose voice is this in, then we have to ask the question of, how slanted is the translation, because if it's in Sauron's own voice, Sauron presumably thinks of himself as the hero here. The best villains all think of themselves as the hero. So to what extent has this translation been massaged to make it sound as sinister as possible?
Sure.
This is, and there's only so far you can push that, of course.
Right. But I'm speculating.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Because obviously, I don't even think Tolkien fully developed the Black Speech beyond this poem. So this is all sort of getting into speculation and kind of academic hot air with respect to textual criticism of a text that doesn't actually exist.
Right.
But anyway.
But one could make some fun, speculations nonetheless. So, like, if I were running off of this, I would say, Elven kings under the sky. That's a phrase that shows up nowhere else. That is not the elves' conception of themselves. So I think we would argue that is, by virtue of being unique, probably an authentic survival representing, Sauron's perspective, his thoughts about the elves, and maybe even reflects a little bit of envy. They're kings, even though they're mostly not kings, and they're free under the sky. There's a freedom there that he's envious of. There's a capacity to create that he doesn't possess. Maybe. And perhaps something similar for the dwarf lords. There's a little bit of despising them. And still more for mortal men, doomed to die, but what can I do with that? Right? But probably he's not identifying himself as the Dark Lord, so maybe the original reads, one for the giver of gifts, who brings all things into order and neatness, right?
So if it is in Sauron's voice, what does dark mean here?
Right.
And only Tolkien would have known for sure.
Right. But maybe it's something like Voldemort. You never speak his name. You don't give him his own title. So you call him the Dark Lord. Or you call him. Maybe that's their name for him, the one that just refuses to, or like Beelzebub, right? A mocking name. But at any rate,
well, because he would have still had his fair form at this point.
Sure,
is that right?
Right.
So what does Dark Lord mean here? If it's in his voice and he still has his fair form.
Yeah.
That's.
If I were writing the speculative paper, I would say the original must not say Dark Lord. That has to be an interposition of the translator carried forward, not giving the devil, not calling the devil by the name he wants to be called.
Right, exactly.
Calling the lie, from the get-go. But otherwise, bringing forward and allowing us to see, what does that cacophony sound like? What is the competing melody?
Yeah, and I was going to, obviously this poem can't predate the ring itself.
Yeah.
Because there is no One Ring until this poem exists. Yeah.
Right.
So that the alternative that perhaps this was some sort of just kind of pre-existing thing that he just engraved on the ring, that can't be, because it can't predate the ring.
Right. But it's striking then, because that means we have kind of three different versions of maybe four different versions of evil song. Then this in Sauron's voice, where there's a whip there's a way, although that's of course made up. But the goblin songs, the orcish marching songs from the Hobbit, and maybe from the Lord of the Rings. Gollum's song about fish, and. Well, Sauron again in his wizard's duel with Finrod in the Tale of Beren and Luthien. We get a little bit of his poetry as well, and maybe something from Morgoth too, in the Lay of Leithian. But anyway, interesting.
Yeah, and is this essentially Sauron's mission statement? Is this? It's his expression of purpose, but then who? Then you have the question. Who is his intended audience?
Sure. Although if I remember right, as he made and put the ring on, the elves wearing their rings heard his voice. So maybe even there, it's an intent to say, you all can't keep things ordered and lasting by yourselves. Work with me. and we'll put everything right. Because it does say that Sauron was not entirely evil at the beginning. He just wanted to fix everything. And
he was the great middle manager.
Right. And fixing it ultimately means bring it under my control. And this is the it's a hostile takeover, but we're not firing anybody.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Very good. So then we come to Three's Company, moving forward into chapter 3. And that features an explosion of poetry. So first we have the road poem again. I don't know if we need to actually read it again, but we do have to note that when Frodo recites the poem, his feet are weary when he pursues the road and not eager as Bilbo's were. So what do you think, Richard, of this change and the repetition of this particular poem?
Well, I mean, I think he's got a burden and uncertainty at this point that is not freedom in the same sense that Bilbo had freedom after, Bilbo gave up the ring and had freedom. Now Frodo is having to take the ring, right? And he does not have freedom in the same way. And certainly we see how weary the ring makes him over the course of the whole book.
Right.
So I think there is. I think Frodo has a completely different state of mind here than what Bilbo had, and that's what's being reflected.
Right. What's interesting there is, why is his state of mind different? What's changed? And is it that Sauron is more awake, and therefore the ring is more of a weighty thing? We could maybe say that, but I would be inclined to suggest maybe the difference is that Frodo has never possessed the ring to the extent that Bilbo did. And Bilbo, therefore, was able to have some sense of control, mostly utilized well, not utilized for dominating other people, but he had his comfort, he had his life stretched. But Frodo has borne this thing as a burden and has avoided using it at Gandalf's advice. And therefore, it is for him not an instrument of domination or control or even of peace. It's just a burden.
No, he's not able to be innocent about it in the same way that Bilbo was. Right. Bilbo had the luxury of not having any idea what it was.
Right.
And Frodo does not. Frodo has the burden of not just the ring, but also of knowledge of what the ring is.
Right. Which interacts strangely with the fact that he is the only person in the entire history of the ring who actually possesses it with a clean conscience. With a completely clean conscience. For him, it actually is a birthday present. Yeah, and it's anyway. And yet, he can't possess it with innocence, even though he's the only one who came to it innocently.
Yeah.
That's an interest. Is that an actual chiasm? I wonder.
Have to do a diagram. write it out and do the diagram. I'm not sure.
So then we have.
We'll check the transcript.
Let's move on. So then we have Upon the Hearth, the Fire is Red, which is described as a walking song, the words of which were made by Bilbo Baggins to a tune that was as old as the hills. So this appears almost immediately after their first encounter with the Black Rider, and just before the second appearance of the Black Rider. In fact, the song almost seems to invoke the second approach of the Black Rider, or at least it overhears them singing, and then it's only driven off by the elves. So myself, Richard, I feel like this scene illustrates in real time the battling melodies of Iluvatar and Melkor from the Ainulindale. I might be pushing that too far, but would you read it for us and then tell us what you think about it?
Sure. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not yet weary are our feet. There's the word weary again. Still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower and leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate, and though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut, and slow, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, fare you well, fare you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then world behind and home ahead, we'll wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. So we have we see where Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh got some of their material.
Sure. I can't read some of these without hearing Enya's voice, for some of those.
Sure.
But yeah.
Well, and also Billy Boyd's voice.
That's true.
For a couple of these.
That's true.
Home is behind, the world ahead.
Yeah.
Through shadows to the edge of night. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade. It's sort of cherry picked,
right,
for a Pippin song, but
all of it together, it's strange. I feel like this is underrated. I maybe have only heard it read aloud in full the 2 or 3 times I've read the books aloud myself, and then that time as you read it, and I think I appreciated it most this time. There's a beautiful melancholy to it. Anyway, you were going to talk, and I interrupted you.
Well, again, so the words of which were made by Bilbo Baggins, right?
Yes.
So we get back to this idea that this is not a very Hobbitish theme here, right? This is Bilbo reflecting his own transformation by the events of The Hobbit, right? His own change of perspective, and then setting that to a familiar melody,
right?
And that's an interesting detail,
and it's the same meter as "The Road Goes Ever On and On." I believe.
Yes, that's true.
With the
upon the hearth
with the variation that let them pass, that interrupts it.
Sure. And we have it's a development very much of the theme of The Road Goes Ever On and On.
Yeah.
And we have this quotidian image of home, right? House, hearth, and home.
Yeah.
But then there's the unknown, and there's what we can go back to, but then what we have to go towards, and and eventually we can come back.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, but there's a journey that has to be taken before we can do that.
Right.
Our feet have to be weary before we can come home.
Right. And I feel like there is somehow just underlying the whole thing when we're talking about then to bed. Is this just the rest at the end of the night after a long day of walking? Or is there
death?
Or is there a hint of death there as well?
I think there's a hint of death there.
Right.
The Tolkien, in terms of I don't want to say he's coy about death when it comes to his main characters, but he does do it more symbolically, particularly with Frodo and Bilbo and so on, than he does explicitly.
Yeah.
The I know that there are people who will argue with me on this one, but sailing off into the west for me is a very, very clear metaphor for death.
Yes.
Um, and I think this is there's a certain extent to which this is a different kind of metaphor for death.
Sure. I have some academic work under my belt that confirms. I mean, that is an long-standing metaphor for death, and is explicitly, Bilbo and Frodo are going to the West to die. That there is no getting away from that. They don't live forever. They're going to be healed, and then to die. But I like about this, you're walking through everything. It's a walking song. It's a journeying song. You're walking past all of these things that are beautiful, but they're not for you to possess. And there's a sense of maybe you're going on an adventure and you're leaving behind settled land, that apple, thorn, and nut and slow, let them go, let them go. All of these, the elements of settled country. You have to pass by, but when you want to come home, but ultimately you're going to bed, and there is the long rest, the long bed. Yeah.
Yeah, this is. I suppose if you could really, really zoom out and say that this whole poem is. Maybe a microcosm of a lifespan.
Yes.
And
a life well lived.
We start off in the bed.
Yeah.
Right. We're born, and then we go to all these places we can't predict, and then we come back and it's over.
Right. But it's a good life, it's not a passive one. You're not just sitting there like a bump on the log, eating Cheetos on the couch, or whatever, whatever temptation. It usually is ice cream for me, but you're out, you're active, you're traveling. So and this is hobbits at their best specifically. They're not just sitting there in comfort. They're traveling. They're taking on the call to travel, and they come home again. But they're always still hobbits. They never cease to be what they are.
Yeah, but I mean the hobbits at their best, but also hobbits post Bilbo, right? Because there's sort of the interest in the unknown and the secret and the things to be discovered that we're told very explicitly is not hobbitish. We like the everyday, we like the common, we like the familiar, and this is Bilbo. I don't want to say rebuking that exactly, but it is him saying there is more.
Right.
There is more.
This is a theme song for hobbits who will climb the tower and look at the sea.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. All right, moving on then, in the chapter, in the context, the song seems to be heard by the Black Rider, because as they finish it, or as Pippin says, and then to bed, more loudly, they hear the hoofs and they realize the rider is approaching again. And although they hide, it begins to crawl toward Frodo, and he feels the urge to put the ring on, and apparently it knows exactly where he is. Its progress, however, is disrupted by the singing of the elves, of Gildor and Glorian as they are approaching. Now, their song is very striking, as it's not just a song, but is explicitly a hymn. I have what feel like a gazillion thoughts about this, but I want to know what you think first, Richard. So if you would, please read it as well, unless you feel equal to chanting it, and then we can talk about it. Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. Snow white, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. Gilthoniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes and bright thy breath. Snow white, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. O stars that in the sunless year with shining hand by her were sown, in windy fields now bright and clear, we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth Gilthoniel, we still remember, we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas.
All right. So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts, Richard?
Well, I mean, I think there's been a ton of ink spilled about how this is very Marian.
Yes.
And I don't think that's a mystery. And there are Marian images throughout Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Galadriel, certainly. This is we again have the conceit of this being a poetic translation of a poetic translation, but and you can see that kind of in the change of register, his deliberate shift to early modern English pronouns.
Right.
He's kind of showing his trick here a little bit.
Sure.
But as he does later when he uses Old English for the Rohirrim, but we have a type of a Marian poem, a type of a Marian hymn here.
Right.
And the Snow White, O Lady, O Queen. I mean, there's I don't in everything I've ever read about Tolkien, it's always I'm always left sort of unclear on what his knowledge of Greek and or Byzantine hymnography would have been. But you could almost you could rework this into something that sounded a lot like Oxionestin.
Right.
More honorable. More honorable than the. What would be the equivalent of the cherubim here?
Elbereth would be the equivalent of a cherubim.
Okay,
that's
sure.
kind of what's interesting. It's if we set aside the question and just assume that Tolkien has the knowledge that we do, we can almost work this back and say this is a type of appropriate hymn to an angelic power in right relationship with God that has had a particular relationship of stewardship and subcreation, glorifying but it's the hymn of this is the hymn of exiles, who are having rebelled against that authority and stewardship and guidance, now being in exile. They're talking about, we see the fields bright and clear. We know your hand was the hand that sowed them. We shouldn't have rebelled. We still remember. We are, we are in active repentance. And we're singing the song as an act of repentance and reconciliation, but it's a song to her, who is not more honorable than, but just is the cherubim, the seraphim, who worked wonders and creative actions under the hand of the one who creates and created all things. And calls us all to create, if we're building a hymn, as it were. And maybe that's a chiasm, too, because we don't really have a lot of senses of what an angelic hymn would be like, I guess, except unless you attend the parish down the road from you and at Taxierche in Watertown. And I suppose they have plenty of hymns to the archangels, but...
what was that? November 2nd?
8th. No,
November
8th.
8th.
Yeah.
November 8th. Yeah. So, just look at the Meneon for November 8th.
Right.
And it's all there. I mean, it's and this is a poetic register that I admire very much, I will say, and it's kind of what I have in my head as sort of a when I've translated or written hymnography, this is at least what I have in my head as an ideal.
Right.
Um, you know,
It's sober, it's traditional without being cloying. If there's a rhyme
without
scheme, it's not too prohibitive and restrictive.
without being preciously archaic.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. So much of my sense of what is good English poetry is formed by Tolkien, which probably an English professor would roll their eyes and throw up their hands at. Uh, but yeah. Uh, Before we talk any more about this, I do have to note, I think I referenced this, but I didn't have the quote handy. So Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull, in their companion to The Lord of the Rings, provide the following information about these elves and why they're singing. So I'll just read the quote. In matter appended to The Road Goes Ever On and On, a song cycle, Tolkien speculates, I love it when Tolkien speculates about his own story, that these particular elves, since they appear to have been going eastward, were elves living in or near Rivendell, returning from the Palantir of the Tower Hills. On such visits, they were sometimes rewarded by a vision, clear but remote, of Elbereth as a majestic figure, shining white, standing upon the mountain Oyolose, which means ever snow white. This is apparently on page 66, so The Road Goes Ever On and On. So somehow, this makes a really big difference to my understanding of what these elves are doing. They're basically on a pilgrimage, these Noldorin exiles. They're engaging in a pious act that, as I was saying, actively brings them into harmony with the will of the Valar, which is to say, the will of the Ainur within Arda, who are dedicated to singing the themes of Ilúvatar aright. So the collision of this pilgrimage with the Nazgul's hunt for the ring is a striking moment. It's a microcosm of that great clash of musics before the world was made. And the other thing is, well, I'll say that later. Do my thoughts align with yours here, Richard? Anything else you would say about it?
Yeah. I mean, it's another example too of how in Tolkien, like, they're even coincidences are not coincidences, right? This convergence of the hobbits with the writers and the elves is an accident, but it's not an accident.
Yeah.
It's part of the design, and who knows exactly what would have happened if Frodo had succumbed and put the ring on, but it doesn't matter. He didn't, and
right.
That was the point.
It is a kairos. It is a critical moment.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And a moment of opportunity, as the lexicon says.
Yes.
A moment when everything hangs on a knife. And I guess I have to add to this. If that's what's on the top of that tower that looks toward the sea that Tolkien keeps talking about, he throws it into the he puts it into the prologue, and he references it again at the end of this chapter. But it's really, I think it's remarkably striking. The hobbits live this mundane, extremely terrestrial life. But within the borders of the Shire are these three towers that we're always told look toward the sea. But in fact, the way in which they look toward the sea is that there is a seeing stone at the top from which you can see the gods. And the hobbits just can't be bothered to even climb it, right? That's the problem with them. And it's fascinating. I'm realizing the dreams that Frodo has at almost the end of every chapter here become really significant because, Tolkien isn't subtle about this. And I'm kind of embarrassed that it took me, almost half a century of life to kind of pick up what he's laying down. That the enormity, the grandeur of a much higher reality than we realize we're living in is present with us every day. And, we're just too tied up with, what kind of fowl will I have on my table tonight? And
Right.
and is lobelia coming to, curdle my temper? Right.
And then the dream is sort of, I guess you could look at it as God effectively intruding and saying, "Excuse me,
Yes, exactly.
there's something important here."
Right. Right. And we'll talk about it almost at the end of our discussion because it's the last thing. But yeah.
Now, I will. I'm sure I'm not the first person to make this observation, but I do chuckle a bit at the fact that Palantir is a calque of television.
Yes.
And I've always assumed that that's intentional, and that there especially with how we see the Palantir being used by Denethor, that there's and Sauron, that there's maybe some sort of some sort of, I don't know if critique is the right word, but maybe some sort of subtle warning on Tolkien's part that
Sure.
this is not this technology is not an unmitigated good.
Right. But I think I think the idea of the Palantir predates the invention of the television, though, or certain Tolkien's
Perhaps.
experience with it, which
You would know more than I would on that point, I think.
I mean,
but it's something that seems inescapable to me.
right. Well, it's not like it would be hard to anticipate that, just the radio is well, Tolkien was suspicious of motor cars. So, you don't have to have actually seen everything play out in the 20th and 21st century to know that this is the way human desire runs and to be
Sure.
suspicious of it. But that's something I want to return to now. When does the Palantir, called the Palantir, first show up? Is it before or after the invention of the television? So,
Yeah, that's
right.
a good question. I would have to look that up.
moving forward then, on the next day and in the next chapter, we see the hobbits strike out across country, with the Black Rider appearing just where they had breakfasted. They struggle through difficult country for some hours, and then they stop for lunch, and they sing a drinking song. It seems a somewhat incongruent song to show up at this point, but it may be worth noting that this feature goes back to the earliest drafts of the story. There's only one verse this time because it's interrupted by a Nazgul scream, although in the first draft it was an invisible sniff that was quite close to them, and they rush away from the place to get away from it. But I'll read this here, and then you can give your thoughts on its theological or literary significance. So I sang it last time, but I'll just read it this time. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go, but under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by.
Yeah, this strikes me as being more Hobbitish. This is, boy, do I really have to go all this way? This strikes me as being more. I don't think we're told who wrote this one, but this strikes me as pre-Bilbo.
I agree. And as for theological significance, do you see anything in this, or shall I, be the priest who preached the sermon?
Gosh, I mean, if we really, really, really want to go there, to the bottle I go to heal my heart and drown my woe, I suppose we could say this is a corrupted Eucharistic image, maybe.
Well, I like that thought because they are the bottle they're drinking is actually something that the elves gave to them. So it's not wine, or if it is, it's something that comes from a blessing. But my inclination, I guess, would be just to say, they're running away from the worst evil they've ever encountered. And they're talking about lying under a tree, drinking, and letting the clouds go sailing by. So we could allow it to be or read it as a warning against, I'm missing the word, laziness, apathy, a lack of vigilance when under attack. This is not the time, Pippin, to chill out.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, you could certainly. That's there's a comment. You could almost look at this as the author's comment on the action in that sense.
Right.
Um, this is Tolkien perhaps pointing out that the hobbitish tendencies of those who are accompanying Frodo, who don't really know everything that's going on yet. This is perhaps where it's working against them.
Right. Fool of a took, but also just
Yes,
silly fat hobbit.
a fool but a wise fool, or a fool but an honest fool.
There we go. And we already read the Bath song and
Yes.
thought about it. Any other things that you'd like to add to that? I know you said you have some additional thoughts, but you want to talk those now or when we actually are reading the chapter itself?
Let's save it for when we get to the chapter.
Very good. So our last poem is also from this chapter, and it's the song that Frodo's friends had that they composed it for him, and they composed it on the model to the tune of the dwarven song from The Hobbit, which
it's a prosomian,
which is very dwarven. Exactly, yes. It's very dwarven. Or rather, that song is very dwarven. This song is not dwarven at all, even if it's written to the tune.
Right.
And there's a lot that invites a deeper reading. Since I read the last one, Richard, would you read this one? And then you can give your thoughts first.
Sure thing. Farewell we call to hearth and hall, though wind may blow and rain may fall. We must away ere break of day, far over wood and mountain tall. To Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell. Through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we ride before the break of day.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about the Dwarven song is that's a song about yearning to return home, right? Returning to a home you lost. This is a song about having to leave.
Right.
This is a song about this thematically that's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Even right down to sympathies, because of course, with the Dwarven song, they don't like the elves very much. And here we are deliberately going to Rivendell. The dwarves, the dwarves are, I think, if we think about a contrast between the dwarves and the hobbits, the dwarves don't really have too much of a problem going out into the world.
Mm-mm.
Their problem is that their problem is not having a home.
Yeah.
Right. Their problem is their problem is having is one of having a homeland.
Right.
The hobbits have a homeland that they don't want to leave.
Yeah. And then there's the issue of interaction with possessions. Dwarves have creative hands, but then heavy hands for possessing those things. But that's not so much the temptation of the hobbits. And somehow Tolkien manages to put that into the different styles of poetry that he gives to the two races, which is strike. I have to give a shout out to my son, because when I first read him The Lord of the Rings, God bless the boy, he didn't reject the poetry. Instead, like, his first academic project was collecting all of the poetry, and he typed it in himself longhand before he learned to type, and making a little book for himself that was a collection of all the poetry. And it was really him that kind of pointed out to me that these styles of the different races are, they're very different. But.
Sure. I mean, for me, there's something a little more plodding about the dwarvish style.
Yes.
Like it feels more metrically heavy, I guess. Whereas the Hobbitish style feels a little more light of foot, let's say.
Yeah. I
But
bumped.
there's
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I bumped into a meme that maybe a meme, maybe I'm using it wrong, and I don't think I can find it, but it was making the argument that like Art Deco architecture looks very dwarven, and then it suggested a different architecture that looks very elven, but I don't remember what it was, and I'm anyway, but there is that very clear stylistic sense. But anyway, you were saying.
I just there's the theme. So as you say, the themes and the feel are different, but there's still a I don't know. There's a sense of urgency here that that I think is also in the dwarven version. That there's a very real for me anyway, there's an urgent sense of needing to get home in the dwarven version, and here there's a very, very urgent sense of we got to get out of here.
Right. I like that we get a brief little appearance from the
and whither then I cannot say.
Right.
Yes, that occurred to me too.
Right. The road goes ever on and on makes an appearance. Yep. So it's interesting. It nicely fits the character and the personalities and the knowledge of Merry and Pippin, who seem to be the composers. Although maybe it's Sam, because Sam's generally the poet of that group. Riffing on the dwarven song, "We Must Away Our Break of Day." They want to go. They have the consciousness that they're going to Rivendell. They're anticipating that there are enemies behind, that there's dread ahead, which is interesting, that they're still willing to do it, but they seem to have a much smaller sense of what their journey, what the task is going to be than reality actually has for them. So I feel like it's really nicely done for the occasion, for the situation.
Well, and the other thing that occurs to me, just since this has kind of been a thing I've been looking for this time around, there's a certain sense of Bilbo's influence here, not just in terms of it being about travel, but also the cultural encounter with the dwarven style, right? Well, would a Hobbit think to do that before Bilbo's adventures?
Right. And that was a point that Dr. Brad Berzer made on my first solo episode here. He was saying, he was reflecting on his latest read-throughs. He was seeing, the effects of Bilbo's long stewardship of the young people of the Shire, of his educational handiwork, basically, shining through in all of the younger hobbits. So even though Bilbo was not on screen, as it were, hardly at all, in Lord of the Rings, the signs of his personality are all over the place. Sure.
Well, glad to have my opinion corroborated by such a competent authority.
So very good. We need to move on though, because we're approaching 2 hours and we haven't even gotten to the chapter yet. So before we move on though, we have to note that many of these poems show up immediately in the first draft. The Road poem and the Elbereth hymn certainly, and I think the Bottle song as well. But there are a couple poems from these early drafts that show up in the Return of the Shadow from the History of Middle-earth. And they are either heavily altered or are simply dropped. And it's worth reading these, if for no other reason that I think they're funny. So why don't you read the first one, Richard? This is the character Odo, who mostly becomes Pippin. He's singing, still in the wilderness before Maggot's farm. He's singing about the bath he hopes is waiting for them.
Sure. O water warm and water hot, O water boiled in pan and pot, O water blue and water green, O water silver clear and clean, of Bath I sing my song. O praise the steam expectant nose, O bless the tub my weary toes, O happy fingers come and play, O arms and legs you here may stay, and wallow warm and long. Put mire away, forget the clay, shut out the night, wash off the day, in water lapping chin and knees, in water kind now lie at ease.
I feel like in the original language, these would have all been like third-person imperatives.
Yes, long live the third-person imperative. Yeah, I suppose in universe, we, so to speak, we might explain this as one of the songs one of the other characters was singing. Well, no, except he does say that Pippin is singing this.
Yes,
but maybe maybe there's an alter, maybe there's a change of memory or something.
maybe.
But I will say that I like what Tolkien eventually published. This is
It's a lot more childish.
It's a lot more childish, definitely. I halfway wonder if he wasn't trying to make Pippin, at least plant the seeds of Pippin being a little more sophisticated earlier on. I don't know.
Maybe.
I mean, the first verse here, water warm and water hot, boiled in pan and pot, blue and water green, silver clear and clean. You can almost see kind of an outline of where he winds up there.
Yes.
But yeah.
And then the exhortation to all of his senses, his fingers and toes and arms and legs and nose. It's like, oh, okay. I would be impressed if one of my kids sang this. I would laugh. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot more of a kid's song.
Yeah.
A lot more of a kid's song.
So then I'll read this one. This is a poem that Mary, although he's not called Mary at the time, we'll find out what his name is shortly. But he leaves the ferry and comes to find them. But they're so tired that, he's like sitting with his back to a tree by the side of the road waiting to see if they come down the road. And they walk right past him. So he, interrupts them, calls them out, and then he recites this poem to them, or maybe he composes it. As I was sitting by the way, I saw 3 hobbits walking. One was dumb, with naught to say. The others were not talking. Good night, I said. Good night to you. They heeded not my greeting. One was deaf, like the other 2. It was a merry meeting.
Yeah, this is a lot more Hobbitish to my ear, and I it also strikes me as being, it for me it almost feels like with just a little bit of an alteration, it could be one of the riddles from Riddles in the Dark. I don't know what the answer would be, but
right, it has that.
But there's a similar voice to it for my money.
Yeah,
a nursery rhyme feel almost.
Yes, and I like the point about the riddle, because it's kind of like one was dumb with naught to say, the others also were not talking.
Yes.
Yeah, it's playing with language. It's very playful. Perhaps. But and then, Richard, you can read, if you would, Odo's actual Bath song once they arrive. It's much shorter.
Sure. Bless the water, O my feet and toes. Bless it, O my 10 fingers. Bless the water, O Odo, and praise the name of Marmaduke.
And there's Mary's original name, Marmaduke. I think Meriadoc is better, but
yes.
Anyway,
I'm also very glad we never actually got a Bungo Baggins.
Yeah, or Bingo, or yeah. Yes. Incidentally, reading ahead, I had never actually processed that the Aragorn character was originally a hobbit named Trotter.
Yes.
But what I didn't realize is that Trotter was a nickname, and that he actually gives a backstory to this Trotter, and he is a cousin of Frodo's, who goes off to adventure and becomes very weathered by the wild.
And loses his feet, right?
Or something like that. I have to
He's
confess.
wearing wooden shoes or something.
I haven't actually gotten to it yet. I just read far enough ahead to be like, oh, you get a backstory for Trotter. That's really cool. And also, I'm really glad we just got rid of that completely.
Yes.
So, this brings us finally to the big discussion, part 2. Our discussion of this chapter, the 5th of the Fellowship of the Ring, A Conspiracy Unmasked. So as always, for our listeners, if you haven't read this recently, don't hesitate to pause and reread it for yourselves before you continue. But in case you don't want to, so we don't lose track of the plot, we will sum up the basic shape of the chapter before we talk about it. We remember we left the hobbits at the Buckleberry Ferry with a basket full of mushrooms as they watched the lights of Farmer Maggot's wagon disappear into the foggy night. So part 1, crossing the river. They board the ferry, and as they cross, the narrator tells us about Buckland, a colony of hobbits east of the river and technically outside of the Shire. And actually, I'm going to show an illustration that Tolkien had made of this, if I can make it show up. So if you see, my photo actually helps it show better. We see kind of from the western side of the river, we can see the lamps on the west side where the Black Rider would be walking. We might even see the Black Rider there, and then across the river, the other stage, and then behind that, the high hill of Brandy Hall. And we get 2 versions of that. So I think that's a neat illustration that shows up in the illustrated version of The Lord of the Rings. It also shows up in this fun little volume, the art of The Lord of the Rings, done by Tolkien himself. So anyway, so we hear about Buckland, that colony of hobbits east of the river, technically outside the Shire. But as they unload on the eastern side, they look across and they see a Black Rider searching the ferry stage on the western side. They discuss fairly nonchalantly how far it is to Brandywine Bridge and how long it will take a horse to go north and come back south and get to them. And then they move on. So part 2, they arrive at the Crick Hollow house, which is not a hole, but a house. And Frodo thinks how homey it feels with all of his things, or Bilbo's things really, arranged inside it. And then they have a bath, and they sing a song about it, as we've discussed. So part 3 and the majority of the chapter is supper and conspiracies. They eat very well. Mrs. Maggot's mushrooms are appreciated by all. And the 3 travelers tell the story of the Black Riders to Merry and the other hobbit of the conspiracy, Fredegar, or Fatty Bulger. And Merry asks Frodo what he makes of all of this, of the Black Riders. So Frodo steels himself to tell them that he has to leave, but as he's struggling to find words, Merry does it for him and reveals that the 3 of them, Merry, Pippin, and Fredegar, have known he's leaving because he keeps muttering about it around them, and that Sam is part of this conspiracy as well and was reporting to the 3 about Frodo's whereabouts and plans until he was caught, and then he stopped reporting. They even know about the ring, not least because Merry saw Bilbo use it once to avoid the Sackville Bagginses. Frodo is amazed and questions whether he can trust anyone. Merry notes that he can trust them to be loyal and keep his secrets, but not to let him go off alone. Sam quotes Gildor's advice to take those who are willing to go. Frodo finally agrees, is much relieved, and they sing him a song. We already heard that. They then discuss their plans, when the riders might arrive, and when they should leave. Frodo, so the part 4, decisions and dreams. Frodo decides to leave at first light the next day and avoid the road, traveling instead through the old forest. Pippin and Fredegar complain about this, but Merry backs Frodo and says it's perfectly reasonable. So they make their plans. Merry and Pippin and Sam will accompany Frodo, while Fredegar will remain behind and pretend to be Frodo. And then they all go to bed. Frodo then dreams of the sound of the sea and sees a tall white tower, and he feels a desire to climb it and to see the sea. So, this is really a very short chapter. It's only 11 pages. It and the shortcut to mushrooms were originally a single chapter. They were separated, I think, when the idea of the conspiracy came into the story as the ring grew more dangerous in Tolkien's thinking. It basically contains just a bath, a dinner and a planning conversation. But of course, in terms of the writing and the way the plot develops, it's important because it showcases the character of the hobbits, and especially Merry's character, which really appears for the first time here. It also continues rather subtly to develop some central themes of Tolkien's thought. So, Richard, anything you'd like to add about this chapter before we actually get to the excerpts?
Yeah. I mean, something else that I think it does in a very, I don't know if it's exactly subtle, but there's a point that Tolkien makes in this chapter that this story is not just about Frodo. And it really, this chapter, I think, really begins to subvert the idea that there is a singular hero to this story. Frodo thinks he is, or thinks he has to be.
Right.
And then his companions tell him, no, you're not. You are not doing this alone.
Right.
This is not all about you.
Right.
And that, I think, is that's a very important beat to the story overall.
Sure.
Because it really sets up it starts to set up the tapestry that spreads out over the rest of the book.
Right. If I can be a little heavy-handed, none of them are going to be just a Mary Jane.
Exactly.
And I use that on purpose because I remember very vividly. I never got into comic books, but Spider-Man 2 was came out while I was in my 20s, and I appreciated the whole tension of that movie. Spider-Man is trying to avoid, he's the hero, he's protecting, and therefore he can't have any relationships. And I can't quote the line, but I appreciated Mary Jane's "Don't I get a say in that?" But I don't think the comic books necessarily play that out as well as...
sure they do. Sure they do. Yeah. Mary Jane is very much a character with her own interests and her own agency and her own story.
I should defer to you on that. But I enjoy what they do with Merry and Pippin and Sam, I think, rather more than that.
And it also... there's, I mean, for me, that's the big thing that this chapter does is establish this is an ensemble story. And that the character who thinks he's the hero isn't actually the hero.
Right.
And that plays out in big ways over the course of the rest of the book. And it also, I think there are some weird bits of perspective shifting in this chapter that I think you can explain by sort of the meta conceit that this was written after Frodo went back and talked to everybody about what they remember and kind of collected the stories from everybody. But like the whole, I think we'll get to it, but like the whole, it's coming out in a minute. Aside from Pippin, that's a very jarring perspective shift.
Yes.
To a certain extent, and I think you have to take it in that context that this is Frodo as the author, or Frodo as the compiler, trying to reflect what everybody remembered of this moment, perhaps because it was so important.
Right. I became aware just recently, Tolkien really struggled actually with how exactly to play out which of the other hobbits knew what at what point. And I think some of that struggle maybe still comes through here. I think the chapter works, but I'm conscious now. I almost wish I hadn't read as much as I have of the the earlier drafts, because I'm seeing a little bit more of the seams of the story than I necessarily want to. But what it does is still, regardless, it highlights that jarring nature, and I think it works, as you say, after the fact. Frodo going back and compiling this, having talked to everyone, and maybe even a little bit of Sam's hand in the draft, in the final draft,
Yeah, sure.
afterwards. So anyway, thank you. Let's move on to our selections. We'll begin as they leave the ferry. Richard, would you read all this?
Sure. The four hobbits stepped off the ferry. Merry was tying it up, and Pippin was already leading the pony up the path, when Sam, who had been looking back as if to take farewell of the Shire, said, and that strikes me as a very, as an aside, that would be a later insert.
Yes.
So it's a later authorial insert. Said in a hoarse whisper, "Look back, Mr. Frodo. Do you see anything?" On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark black bundle left behind. But as they looked, it seemed to move and to sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled, or went crouching, back into the gloom beyond the lamps. "What in the Shire is that?" exclaimed Merry. "Something that is following us," said Frodo. "But don't ask any more now. Let's get away at once." They hurried up the path to the top of the bank, but when they looked back, the far shore was shrouded in mist, and nothing could be seen. "Thank goodness you don't keep any boats on the west bank," said Frodo. "Can horses cross the river?" "They can go 10 miles north to Brandywine Bridge, or they might swim," answered Merry, "though I never heard of any horse swimming the Brandywine. But what have horses to do with it? I'll tell you later. Let's get indoors, and then we can talk."
Very good. All right. So, that's, I mean, in terms of the plot, this maintains the tension, and it sets up the early departure. It necessitates the early departure the next morning. Frankly, it ought to necessitate an immediate departure. No bath, no conversation, no meal, just get. But it also introduces Merry and brings him kind of center stage, because he really hasn't been seen in the story so far, except for his one line in chapter 1 after Lobelia storms out, saying that Frodo is, "You're not a Baggins, you're a Brandybuck," and Merry says that's a compliment and therefore not true. I think, but here we finally see more of him. Any thoughts on your part about this, Richard?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
I included it because I think it sets the stage. It feels strange not to read it, but I kind of had the same, I don't know what to say about it except, it's doing a job. But anyway, so they go to the house, they have the bath, they have the meal, they tell about their journey and the Black Riders. And Pippin notes that Farmer Maggot had guessed that the trouble had to do with Bilbo's treasure. Merry then asks Frodo what he thinks of Maggot's guess, and Frodo's response brings us kind of entirely into the plot. So, Richard, would you read this one as well?
"I think," answered Frodo slowly, "that it was a good guess as far as it goes. There is a connection with Bilbo's old adventures, and the writers are looking, or perhaps one ought to say searching, for him or for me. I also fear, if you want to know, that it is no joke at all, and that I am not safe here or anywhere else." He looked round at the windows and walls as if he was afraid they would suddenly give way. The others looked at him in silence and exchanged meaning glances among themselves. I bumped on that reading it last night, too. Meaning glances, as opposed to meaningful glances.
It's not a way we usually use that word in American English.
Yeah. "It's coming out in a minute," whispered Pippin to Merry. Merry nodded. "Well," said Frodo at last, sitting up and straightening his back as if he had made a decision, "I can't keep it dark any longer. I have got something to tell you all, but I don't know quite how to begin." "I think I could help you," said Merry quietly, "by telling you some of it myself." "What do you mean?" said Frodo, looking at him anxiously. "Just this, my dear Frodo. You are miserable because you don't know how to say goodbye. You meant to leave the Shire, of course, but danger has come on you sooner than you expected, and now you are making up your mind to go at once. And you don't want to. We are very sorry for you." Frodo opened his mouth and shut it again. His look of surprise was so comical that they laughed. "Dear old Frodo," said Pippin, "did you really think you had thrown dust in all our eyes? You have not been nearly careful or clever enough for that. You have obviously been planning to go and saying farewell to all your haunts all this year since April. We have constantly heard you muttering, 'Shall I ever look down into that valley again, I wonder?' and things like that. And pretending that you had come to the end of your money and actually selling your beloved bag end to those Sackville Bagginses, and all those close talks with Gandalf."
So, what's your take on all this, Richard?
I mentioned Thucydides earlier, and I do think there's something Thucydidean about the project here. Thucydides, he fights in the Peloponnesian War, and then he goes off in exile and writes his own memoir of the war, and also incorporates the memories from other people he talked to, and then inserts all these speeches that he says these aren't actually what anybody actually said, but they sounded good, and they basically reflect what was being talked about.
It was the gist.
It was the gist.
This is what they should have said.
Yes, and this strikes me as maybe being one of those, because it's just a little too clever by half. But it's not too much of a stretch for me to think that Pippin would have said something like, "Come on, man, we know you better than this."
If you want to keep a secret, you probably shouldn't talk about it, under your breath or not.
Yes, exactly. It's and it strikes me as kind of Pippin's memory of what he should have said.
Sure.
Perhaps.
Outside of the narrative frame, I think there is a genuine... It takes some time for the characters of Pippin especially to settle in, because he's been so many different characters through the different drafts. From Odo to there was a different character, and then eventually to Pippin, and there were other people that kind of get consolidated into Pippin. I think Pippin's characterization is pretty stable by the time we get outside the Shire, but these early drafts, he bounces around a bit. But inside the frame, I like your thought better. He had a little bit of a hand, perhaps, in some of the editing of perhaps some of the later textual recensions, maybe the one that got brought to Gondor, that is the one that actually survives, and so forth. And Pippin's like, I should have said that. That would be more befitting a member of the Tower of Guard, or something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. What I should have said. I for myself, I was struck just reading through this, with the sense Frodo is being altogether too cavalier, in realistic terms, with his life and the lives of his companions, knowing what he carries, knowing, or he should know who is after him. He had that conversation with Gildor saying, get away from them as fast as possible, have no dealings with them. He knows how long it's going to take them to go 10 miles north and 10 miles south on a horse, but he's sitting there having a bath and enjoying a meal. It seems just because he doesn't want to tell his companions how urgent this matter is, and they have another plan in mind. And I've had experiences like this where I'm in the church and I have 15 things that I have to do, and I know I've got a time frame. Like especially between the unnailing service and the lamentation service during Holy Week, every minute of that time is precious. But someone comes up and wants to talk to me about whether the eggs got dyed right, and I sit there and I listen instead of saying, I cannot talk about that right now, because I don't know how to convey the urgency to someone who doesn't already feel it. And I see maybe some of that in Frodo, perhaps. And yet it doesn't seem, it seems to work all to good nonetheless. There's maybe a blessing in his attending to his companions, to his friends. I'd want to develop that more. I'm really off the cuff here. But anyway, the other thing I want to mention, the question of whether Frodo or Bingo or Bilbo or whoever the lead character is, whether he's actually run out of money or not, is something that Tolkien kicked back and forth and all over the place. It was part of the plan early on that he had actually run out of money. It was, the idea originally of why he had to leave and go off on an adventure again. But it seems to have ultimately been dispensed with, that he still had plenty of money, but he needed to leave because of the ring.
Yeah, and that is something that I feel like Tolkien is a bit coy about. And you have the line from Bilbo, like, this is, I forget exactly what it is, the last of the Smaug vintage or whatever it is,
right?
Implying that this is the last of what he brought back from the adventure with the dwarves. But it's also clear that that's not the whole story.
Yeah. The Bagginses were independently wealthy and entirely at leisure long before Bilbo came back with dragon gold.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, so moving on, they then tell Frodo that they're planning to come with him. They're not just going to let him leave by himself. And Frodo tries to, tries to reject the offer. I'll read this bit. My dear and most beloved hobbits, said Frodo, deeply moved. But I could not allow it. I decided that long ago, too. You speak of danger, but you do not understand. This is no treasure hunt, no there and back journey. I am flying from deadly peril into deadly peril. Of course we understand, said Merry firmly. That is why we have decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we are going to do our best to help you against the enemy. Which, to just skip ahead, that's shocking. How do they know about the ring? Frodo hasn't told them that. The casual mention of the ring is, out of a clear blue sky to him. So Merry has to explain about seeing Bilbo dodge the Sackville Bagginses with the ring, and then Merry proceeds to explain that Sam has actually been reporting to them about Frodo's well-being for a long time, until he was caught and then stopped. Frodo runs out of amazement at this and isn't sure whether he feels angry or amused or relieved or merely foolish, and he observes that he can't trust anyone. Richard, would you read this passage?
You bet. Sam looked at him unhappily. It all depends on what you want, put in Merry. You can trust us to stick to you through thick and thin to the bitter end, and you can trust us to keep any secret of yours closer than you keep it yourself. But you cannot trust us to let you face trouble alone and go off without a word. We are your friends, Frodo. Anyway, there it is. We know most of what Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We are horribly afraid, but we are coming with you or following you like hounds. And after all, sir, added Sam, you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gildor said you should take them as was willing, and you can't deny it. I don't deny it, said Frodo, looking at Sam, who is now grinning. I don't deny it, but I'll never believe you are sleeping again, whether you snore or not. I shall kick you hard to make sure. You are a set of deceitful scoundrels, he said, turning to the others. But bless you, he laughed, getting up and waving his arms. I give in. I will take Gildor's advice. If the danger were not so dark, I should dance for joy. Even so, I cannot help feeling happier than I have felt for a long time. I had dreaded this evening.
Let's pause and just talk about this. I mean, I wanted, we had to sum it up. I would have loved to have us read the whole thing, but I think you have thoughts about this, and I really, yeah.
This is kind of storytelling 101 here, right? Here are the stakes, here are the choices.
Yeah.
Um, and Tolkien is signposting pretty clearly here. This is not The Hobbit. He says it exactly. This is no treasure hunt, no there and back journey.
Right.
We're on a completely different scale here. This is not fun.
Yes.
This is not a children's story. This is a big deal,
This
and
is
then
deadly serious.
deadly serious. And then you have the other character saying exactly, which is why it can't just be about you.
Yeah.
It can't just be a hero's journey. It can't just be. It can't just be the adventures of one person,
Right.
because it's too big for that.
With a little bit of a gentle, correction or admonition. We'll keep any secret of yours closer than you keep it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really like how the character of the other hobbits comes through. This line of Mary's, whether he came back and tampered with it after the fact, this could go on his tombstone. This is like Mary, Mary the hero, Mary the stalwart, Mary the hobbit at his best. This is our first sight of a brandy buck at his most brandy buckish, and we're like, okay, good job. Yeah. And the line, you don't have an option. We're coming with you. You can either take us or we'll follow you. But we're horribly afraid, but we're doing the right thing.
We understand the stakes.
Yeah.
We understand the choice we're making.
Yeah.
And so whatever choice you have to make, we know what choice we have to make.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and Frodo's joy at hearing this, it is, if you will, it's a small eucatastrophe in a sense.
It's a confession.
It is,
right?
It is. That he's finally free of the burden. He's told the truth. He's owned what he thinks he's supposed to do, and he's been told that the burden is not his to carry, not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. It's a confession, and there is an unlooked for, unexpected joy. Even though the danger is dark, he says I should dance for joy, but he has gotten up and he's waving his arms. He is dancing a little bit for joy. So, anyway, let's move on. Once the decision is made, they make their preparations and then they go to bed. The description of Frodo's attempt to sleep and the dreams he has, this is, I think, as I said, more important than I had ever realized. I'll start this bit, Richard, and then you can finish it up, and then I want to know what you think about it first. So when at last he had got to bed, Frodo could not sleep for some time. His legs ached. He was glad that he was riding in the morning. Eventually he fell into a vague dream in which he seemed to be looking out of a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below among the roots there was a sound of creatures crawling and snuffling. He felt sure they would smell him out sooner or later.
Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off, a sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly he found he was out in the open. There were no trees after all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb the tower and to see the sea. He started to struggle up the ridge toward the tower, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder.
All right. I hadn't processed, the change of venue, the change of space, which happens in dreams, but there is a very strong sense of divine intervention. He's in this anxious dream, actually under effectively demonic attack, and then all of a sudden the attack is removed, and he's brought to a different place where an invitation is presented to him effectively. But we were talking about the music and all of that. What are your thoughts, Richard?
I mean, there were a lot of things going on in this passage. I mean, this is Tolkien's self-insert here. You know, this was his dream, his recurring dream, right? Which, you know, there's the vision of Numenor here, sinking into the sea. There is as we talked about earlier, the sea, you know, the going into the west itself being something of an image of death. You know, there's a lot happening here. There's a, you know, as you say, divine intervention. There's God saying, okay, you know, all these Palantiri are around you, but since you can't be bothered, here. This is important here.
Take your first step into a larger world.
Exactly.
Hello there.
Yes. You know, there's you know, there's a bit of a warning here. You know, this is again, it's sort of what's at stake that he doesn't realize is at stake.
Yeah.
It's a dense passage.
Right. And we talked about this a couple months ago, but you and I haven't talked about it. The tower and the sea is a motif, an element that shows up first in Tolkien's writing in The Monsters and the Critics, in his Beowulf essay. You know, that's his metaphor about, you know, letting a work do what it is intending to do and not taking it apart to, you know, just to see, you know, what it shows of the writer's personality or of literary history, but let the work of art tell the story that it's telling, and let it work upon you, you know, in the way that it's meant to work. You know, I'm assuming you're familiar with that, Richard, but if not, just say so and I'll sum it up.
I'm familiar with its existence. I haven't read it.
Right. So the basic idea, you know, Monsters and the Critics, and I talked about this before, so I'll be brief. Monsters and the Critics is Tolkien's essay basically saying, fine, sure, Beowulf is the one heroic poem that we have left in Old English, and sure, it's nice to look at that and try to find signs of what, you know, pre-Christian German, you know, pagan, you know, heroic literature was like and all of that. But if that's all we're doing, we're like, you know, the descendants of a man who, you know, the descendants of a man who had built a tower with old stones, and the tower fell down, and his descendants took the stones and built a house with it, and then smart people came afterwards and tore down both the remnants of the tower and the house to take the individual rocks to figure out what they said about the prehistory. You know, and they criticized the man. Why did he build a tower here? It's a stupid thing to build. It doesn't have any function. And they wondered why he hadn't rebuilt the original, you know, structure that predated him. And then he says, but from the top of the tower, the man had been able to see the sea. And he says, so, you know, there's a point to this. And, you know, Tolkien had just published that, I think, in the mid-30s, right as he is beginning to write Lord of the Rings here. And, you know, but the image persists time and again. And it showed up in the plot originally, and then it shifted, you know, the description of the tower from which, you know, you could see the sea, but hobbits never climbed it. It shows up in the prologue. So you know, it's kind of Tolkien both showing his heart, as I said before, and telling us there's something more going on. This is not just an adventure story. It's not just a fantasy story. There's more going on here, both within the thing for Frodo. It's not just a task to get rid of a ring. He's being invited to leave behind the mundane and really enter into the grand tale himself, as Sam says.
Sure.
And as you say, it's incredibly dense. Yeah. The other thing I would say, the the importance of, he was sure that the sounds, snuffling, would smell him out sooner or later. I meant to mention this before, when he's saying, when he just starts to reveal things, I'm being, there are riders searching, or rather they're looking, or perhaps one ought to say searching, because they can't see. They can only smell. They don't exist really in the physical realm. Primarily, and the dream then functions as a place where he's more vulnerable to them, which we understand from the from the real world, and dreams are a place of vulnerability. So anyway, there's a ton going on here.
Yeah.
And it's not the last time we'll see this dream.
No.
It's like every night Frodo has this dream, effectively. But all right. One final anything else you want to say about that? Okay.
No, not at this point. I mean, it's obviously it's a thematic, as you say, a recurring thematic image throughout the book that we get kind of different perspectives on, especially once he meets Faramir.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah. So there's one last thing I want to talk about, and I hesitate to bring this up, and maybe you can even help me, grapple with this. But
Okay.
This is a challenge, a conundrum that I have just this read through, and it has to do with Sam. So this comes after Merry tells how he saw Bilbo use the ring, and it's a bit of a puzzle. So would you read this, Richard, and then I'll explain what's bugging me about it.
You bet. Well, as I was saying, Mary proceeded, I kept my knowledge to myself till this spring when things got serious. Then we formed our conspiracy, and as we were serious too and meant business, we have not been too scrupulous. You are not a very easy nut to crack, and Gandalf is worse. But if you want to be introduced to our chief investigator, I can produce him. Where is he? Said Frodo, looking round, as if he expected a masked and sinister figure to come out of a cupboard. Step forward, Sam, said Merry, and Sam stood up with a face scarlet up to the ears. Here's our collector of information, and he collected a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught, after which I may say he seemed to regard himself as on parole and dried up.
All right. So here's what's strange to me. There wasn't much information for Sam to collect until the very moment that he was caught by Gandalf. And that's the night that Gandalf arrives, having been absent for decades. Everything about the ring and the enemy that Merry and Pippin apparently know only came out in that conversation. So, at the least, as Hammond and School point out, Sam must have made one final report with details of Gandalf's conversation with Frodo. But the thing is, we, the reader, haven't seen much of anything of Frodo's life before that point. And it initially, and really ongoing, it feels to me like Sam's role as chief investigator must have been of short duration. So that or Tolkien made a mistake. And that's made me look more carefully, and I noticed that as Merry is first explaining to Frodo that Frodo hadn't done a good job of hiding things, he says something else that maybe resolves the conundrum. He says, you must remember, we know you well, and we are often with you. We can usually guess what you're thinking. I knew Bilbo, too. To tell you the truth, I have been watching you rather closely ever since he left. I thought you would go after him sooner or later. Indeed, I expected you to go sooner. Lately, we've been very anxious. We've been terrified that you might give us the slip and go off suddenly, all on your own, like he did. Ever since this spring, we've kept our eyes open and done a good deal of planning on our own account. You are not going to escape so easily. So, my best guess on this, my best take, is that Sam had effectively been engaged by Merry and Pippin and Fredegar to help them keep an eye on Frodo, basically from his childhood.
Yeah, like for the last 17 years, right? Isn't that how long it is?
And that Sam had helped them keep track of how Frodo was doing. And then as Frodo approached his 50th birthday, he started to wander farther afield. We hear about that in The Shadow of the Past. And as rumors of strange things happening in the world began to accumulate, Sam's information would have been very helpful, and he might measure up to the level of he collected a lot of information before he was caught. But it really does seem like Sam has to have made a final report to Merry and Pippin about the ring and the enemy before stopping, and maybe he didn't stop completely. Maybe he just gave hints like, watch him now. I can't say more. Be careful. this is important, but I can't say more. A little bit of, Doctor Strange with his,
Yes.
but again, reconciling chief investigator who collected a ton of information from you and Gandalf, who was very close with, on the night Gandalf arrives, he catches Sam, and Sam dries up after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think that makes sense. I mean, it seems like there would be a lot of reasons, given the abruptness of Bilbo's departure and so on and so forth, that there might be a lot of reasons why they would want to keep a close eye on him. And Sam, Sam seems like the closest link in the chain.
Right.
I can buy that. I can buy that they've basically had, in some form or another, an informal agreement that we got to keep an eye on this guy,
right,
for his own good,
right. And maybe that. Sorry, go ahead.
And be ready to do what he needs at a moment's notice.
Right. And maybe that reflects, not maybe, that actually reflects beautifully on the character of all three of them. Frodo has felt like he's alone, but he has not been. He's had support, he's had backup, he's had protectors and guardians. We hear about the Rangers outside the Shire protecting, him later on, but inside the Shire too, he's had friends, who have his back. And Sam's role as not just a servant, not just a gardener, but ultimately as a friend and an equal, starts to make more sense, because he had that role, but he really took it upon himself to be the protector, the bodyguard, the last line of defense.
And the other thing that occurs to me, we have Mary saying you are not a very easy nut to crack, but then we also just had the line about we'll keep your secrets better than you are able to yourself.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure how to resolve that one, but
that's fair. Fair. Maybe just you won't talk about it overtly. We ask you, and you're determined to keep us on the outside, but you're actually pretty.
Maybe that's it.
You're pretty bad at keeping the secret, but you're determined to keep us. Basically, it's a nice way of saying you really seem to think we're stupid, but we're not.
I can see. I can go with that.
Yeah,
I can go with that.
Anyway, so really, there's a lot of these could have been very hard conversations. If people had been angry, if they'd been frustrated, the conversation could have gone very differently. And it's maybe most striking to see the love. The habitual, disciplined, intentional love between these cousins, playing out over decades, now coming to fruition and blossoming in this moment. So,
well, the other thing that occurs to me is that you've got a contrast here between the house, which is very, very much a false home, right? And you even have the line in the chapter saying that I forget what exactly it is, but Frodo felt like he had hardly moved at all, right? It's so closely matches Bag End in some respects that it's like it's a copy of it, but it's a fake copy, right? And it's a copy where he can't stay.
Right. He doesn't even stay 24 hours there.
Right. Whereas Merry, Pippin, and Sam and Fredegar, these are the people who won't leave him no matter what.
Right.
He can. They are the home he can count on.
Right. They're the true Shire in a sense. He's leaving it behind, but in all essentials, he's bringing it with him, and it doesn't stay. Actually, that's interesting. The Shire disintegrates in his absence until he comes back to it with his friends, and they restore it and put it right.
Right. Yeah. And there's even, if we want to go here, there's almost a Christ-like image. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head.
Right.
But he has his disciples.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. You are my friends. Yeah. Oh, very good. Thank you, Richard. I enjoyed that deeply. All right, that moves us on to Act 4. So we all love reading Tolkien, and the books are paramount. The movies and the video games are maybe okay or tolerable.
No, the movies were New Line, not Paramount.
Hey. That got me right. Beautiful. All right. It's always interesting to hear how people interpret reading the books out loud. So for this segment, I've asked Richard to pick a favorite passage and read it to us. So what did you pick, and what do you like about it?
So this is from Chapter 6 of Book 2, Lothlorien.
Yes.
So I am on page 334 of this edition. If everybody can see that. So they've just escaped Moria. Gandalf has just fallen, and so they're starting to walk. Gimli says, "There lies the Mirror. Now long shall I journey, ere I have joy again. It is I that must hasten away, and he that must remain." So, the company now went down the road from the gates. It was rough and broken, fading to a winding track between heather and whin that thrust amid the cracking stones. But still it could be seen that once long ago a great paved way had wound upwards from the lowlands to the dwarf kingdom. In places there were ruined works of stone beside the path, and mounds of green topped with slender birches, or fir trees sighing in the wind. An eastward bend led them hard by the sward of Mirror, and there, not far from the roadside, stood a single column broken at the top. "That is Durin's stone," cried Gimli. "I cannot pass without turning aside for a moment to look at the wonder of the dale." "Be swift, then," said Aragorn, looking back towards the gates. "The sun sinks early. The orcs will not maybe come out till after dusk, but we must be far away before nightfall. The moon is almost spent, and it will be dark tonight." "Come with me, Frodo," cried the dwarf, springing from the road. "I would not have you go without seeing Keled Zaram." He ran down the long green slope. Frodo followed slowly, drawn by the still blue water in spite of hurt and weariness. Sam came up behind. Beside the standing stone, Gimli halted and looked up. It was cracked and weather-worn, and the faint runes upon its side could not be read. "This pillar marks the spot where Durin first looked in the Mirror," said the dwarf. "Let us look ourselves once ere we go." They stooped over the dark water. At first they could see nothing. Then slowly they saw the forms of the encircling mountains mirrored in a profound blue, and the peaks were like plumes of white flame above them. Beyond there was a space of sky. There, like jewels sunk in the deep, shone glinting stars, though sunlight was in the sky above. Of their own stooping forms no shadow could be seen. "O Keled Zaram, fair and wonderful," said Gimli, "there lies the crown of Durin till he wakes. Farewell." He bowed and turned away, and hastened back up the green sward to the road again. "What did you see?" said Pippin to Sam, but Sam was too deep in thought to answer.
Yeah. That's beautiful. What made you pick that, and what do you like about it?
Yeah, so I find the relationship of the narrative present to the past in Lord of the Rings fascinating. Pre-COVID, there was a Tolkien conference in Chicago, if I remember correctly, that was supposed to happen, and I was supposed to actually present a paper on this very topic there. And it never happened.
I grieved that as well. It was
Yeah. But I find the way the past is handled to be really really interesting. There are no museums in Middle Earth, right?
Except at nickel
Thing
delving, but that doesn't count.
Yeah. Um, and, things are either functional and maintained, or they're not functional and they're not maintained.
Yeah.
And if they're not functional and they're not maintained, they still represent a memory, but not a memory that we have to preserve in amber, right? And, there's not a sense of we have to maintain, and maybe if things are even kept functional, there's not a sense of, at least so far as I can tell, there's not necessarily a sense of the way it was originally built has to be kept pristine, according to according to some idealized notion of how it was when it was first built.
Sure.
But it's about function, and it's about present day context, and the way memory, and also tied to that is this idea of different scales of memory, right? Because when the elves, being thousands and thousands of years old, they represent a living memory that gets said explicitly in the prologue, right? Of things that happened hundreds, thousands of years ago, where so something that maybe humans remember in poetry, they can talk to an elf who was there,
Right.
right? And so it's like, you would potentially have a ruin in the narrative present where the elf was like, yeah, I remember standing on this when it was brand new.
Right.
So just that whole web of how memory is transmitted, how that gets reflected in the landscape and the monuments, and in the condition of the landscape and the monuments. I find that fascinating.
Right.
As somebody with a historian's training, I just find that really interesting.
Right. I was struck, and that makes a ton of sense to me, and resonates with what struck me, which is that this is the payoff for a previous appearance of poetry, which happened only a couple hours before for the characters, before they go into the chamber of Mazarbul, before they find Balin's tomb, before Gandalf fights the Balrog and falls. They're standing in the Great Hall, and one of the hobbits, I think, calls Moria these dark holes, and Gimli says they are not dark holes, and he recites a poem that talks about it starts. And again, reflecting on the same things you're saying. The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen, no words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells, he stooped and looked in mirror and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread upon the shadow of his head. It's striking, even after everything that has happened in the present, he won't leave without going and drinking deeply of that memory and that grief and of seeing what he's heard, because he's
without making a pilgrimage.
Right. Exactly. He won't neglect that. And I liked what you said. An elf can say, "Well, I remember it," but for dwarves and men, poetry fulfills that function of preservation, even as they let it go.
Transmission and preservation.
Right.
Yeah.
The memory is preserved while allowing the thing to change. Which is a tension that's all over the place.
Absolutely.
In Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
Now I want to hear how you would apply that to the fire and the reconstruction of Notre Dame in Paris. Because
oh gosh, that's a very complicated question.
Sure.
I mean, the thing of it is that cathedrals took centuries to build, often would take centuries to build. Hagia Sophia is kind of a very rare case of something
6
that was able to
years.
be built,
Yeah.
be able to be built quickly because it had the full resources of the empire behind it.
Sure.
I forget exactly how long what period or over what span of time Notre Dame was built, but like the Cologne Cathedral, I want to say was built over like 300
Right.
years, something like that, and.
Like,
So, you have, but even with Hagia Sophia, you have layers of things that are added later. The dome obviously is a replacement. The walls haven't fallen down because of supports that the Ottomans added. So this is sort of almost a rebuilding a tower with old stones problem, or
Right.
a ship of Theseus problem, even.
Right.
Of what represents reconstruction, what represents rebuilding something.
Sure. And the question you raised too of, is it, in Tolkien's world, things are either used, but if they're not being used, they're not maintained. But we have a whole civilization of preserving things that we won't use. And that's not just overseas in post-Christian Europe. In our parishes too, we have, this is how they built it. The founders who established the church, can't change anything.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
It's like, but it has to be a usable space. Otherwise, it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the acoustics of Notre Dame. I mean, I believe the acoustics were enabled by a certain kind of wood that was used in the interior that doesn't exist anymore, or is much harder to come by now. So that was a problem that they had to solve.
Sure.
In the restoration. Yeah, it's and then you have these centuries-old churches that now have electric lighting and neon exit signs and things like this. It's complicated.
Yeah,
it's very complicated.
And microphones.
Don't get me started.
Yep, we'll let that go. Just
microphones as a replacement for a live acoustic. Insist upon themselves, as the kids say,
and then live streams it. Yeah, we will let that pass as the walking song says. So.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Richard, and for the sidetrack into church architecture. So, all right, now it's time for a little segment I like to call "They Are Taking the Hobbits to Isengard." All right. So, Richard, now is the time when you get to play for absolutely no prizes a little game which will test whether you are a true Tolkien fan, whom everyone should listen to, or whether we just wasted 2 hours and 40 minutes of everyone's time. The format here...
I'm betting on the latter.
The format here is one I inherited from my father and his brothers, who used to play this trivia game with each other when I was young. So the game is this. I will read a quote from Tolkien's works, and you have to tell me who the speaker was. Bonus points, but actually not, if you can give the context as well. So the rules for the quotations are as follows. And these apply to both of us. It will be an actual quotation by an actual character. No narrator gotchas. It will be a full sentence or a sentence fragment if that is all that is quoted. It will only be taken, finally, from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So I'll give you an example so you can see what sort of skullduggery you have to watch out for. Last time I did this, two months ago, I gave the quote, "I've found this, and I'm going to keep it," to Zach Heller. Now that is, of course, said by Deagle to Smeagol when he demands the ring, immediately before Smeagol murders him. And I did do a web search, or a search within the Kindle book to make sure it's not said a second time. But within the book, the line is actually spoken by Gandalf at the Council of Elrond as he tells the story of the finding of the ring. So the correct answer would be Gandalf says that, but he's quoting Deagle. So let the player beware. So
all right.
The other part of this is you get to try to stump me as well. So I will give you 3 quotations, and you can give me 2. If between the 2 of us we get 3 or more right, we survive. If not, well, then the Uruk-hai make a meal of us. So we get to show whether we have that convivial spirit and mutual support that our hobbits have shown for each other in today's chapter. So are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
So my category today for you, and this is a limitation for me, you can pick whatever you want, but is talking about poetry. So all of these quotes will be from in close proximity and related to a poem or a song in the Legendarium. So here is your first quote. I am being swept off my feet at last.
Oh, Lord. I'm being swept off my feet at last. I'm going to have to take a wild guess here because I don't know. I can't think of it. I'm going to say Mary.
It's certainly a Hobbit-like line. It is incorrect. So I'll give the larger context. But the time has come. I am being swept off my feet at last, he added. And then in a low voice, as if to himself, he sang softly in the dark, the road goes ever on and on. So it's Bilbo from the first chapter. It's right after he's let go of the ring.
All right.
So
there we are.
So strike one.
Strike one.
All right, now your turn to give me one.
Sure. No man knows, yet ancient legend, now seldom spoken, has somewhat to report.
Ooh, no man knows, but ancient legend, seldom spoken, has somewhat to report. So I'm going to guess that this has something to do with Dunharrow and the Paths of the Dead. And therefore I will guess that this is Aragorn speaking.
You are correct on the context, but it is Theoden's line.
That was going to be my other guess. Oh, well. So close. All right. So we have to get all 3 right to avoid being spoiled by the Uruk-hai. So, and sadly, I didn't pick easy ones for you. So your next quote is, "This is indeed a strange chance."
Faramir?
Oh, that's a great guess, and it sounds like Faramir, but no. This is Frodo speaking to Pippin and Sam, and I'll give the full context. The song ended. "These are high elves. They spoke the name of Elbereth," said Frodo in amazement. "Few of that fairest folk are ever seen in the Shire. Not many now remain in Middle-earth, east of the Great Sea. This is indeed a strange chance."
Right, there we go.
Which is to say, no chance at all.
Yes.
But instead a glimpse of the great clash of musics. All right. Well, now we're just playing for, honor.
Yeah, exactly. And I have none anyway. All right. All right. Order your fellows back to their places at once if you don't want me to deal with them.
Order your fellows back to your place at once if you don't want me to deal with them. I'm going to guess that that's Mary from the Scouring of the Shire.
Well done. That's exactly right.
Awesome. Okay, at least we have some honor left.
Yes, some honor.
All right, and then my last one for you, and this is a little on the nose, but that was poetry.
Sam?
Oh, good guess. But no, that's Pippin.
Pippin. Oh,
he's commenting on the we must away our break of day. So do you really want to start before the break of day? That was just poetry, he says anyway.
Oh, okay. Yes. All right. The thing is, I when I was rereading this last night, I laughed out loud at that line because it's just like this is sort of Tolkien having a little bit of a joke.
Right.
Oh well.
Dismissive
out of context.
That's the thing. But dismissive of everything we've spent the whole episode saying.
Yes.
No, this is actually really, really important. But all right. Well, I'm so sorry. It seems we have both gotten looted and half-eaten by the Uruk-hai today.
And I don't even have any honor.
We needed our legs, but we don't have them anymore. So good luck to us in Isengard. But at least we were looted together. So
there we are.
All right. Okay, well, that's all we've got for today. Thank you so much, Richard, for co-hosting the Amon Sûl podcast with me today. It makes my day every time I have a chance to spend time with you, whether it's the chant exam preparation that you were helping me through years ago, or the consecration that I got to sing along with you for last year. But it's a joy and an honor and a privilege. So thank you so much.
Oh, it was a joy to be here, Father. Thank you for the invitation.
So next time on Amon Sûl, I will be joined by my brother, Josh Cook, and we're going to do a retrospective on taking all 5 of these chapters and talking about them, digging more deeply into some of the themes that we've opened up before we actually leave the Shire. So I'm looking forward to that. You can send your questions, your comments, your topic suggestions, or any orcish ideas and suggestions for their taking the hobbits to Isengard to me at amonsûl@ancientfaith.com or by messaging me through the podcast Facebook page. We also welcome guest co-host proposals. I've received one that I need to respond to still. So if you have a chapter you'd like to discuss with us, please make a pitch. Lastly, we would love to receive more photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop, Amon Sûl, and the Weather Hills approaching it. The podcast that we're featuring this month during the podcast opening on YouTube is new this month. It's a photo of the Book Cliffs near Grand Junction, Colorado, submitted by listener Rolf Soli. It's a different sort of terrain from our last photo, but I think it fits the basic gist of Amon Sûl, and the southwestern mountains and sky certainly make me homesick. So please send us more. We'd love to grow our portfolio of candidate Amon Sûls. If you live or work or commute in the vicinity of Weathertop, please share your view with us.
And if you want more of this kind of thing, subscribe to the Amon Sûl podcast on your favorite podcast app, and please rate and review. And look up the Amon Sûl podcast page on Facebook, click the follow button, and most of all, share with your friends. And while you're at it, if you appreciate this or other Ancient Faith media, go to ancientfaith.com/support and show some practical love.
We've been around since 2019. You can find our full back catalog of episodes by going to tolkienpodcast.com. Yes, we got that URL, that domain. Or you can all just you can just subscribe on your podcast app. The Amon Sûl podcast theme music is Hidden Past, and the closing theme is Celtic Impulse.
Our podcast cover art was created by Samuel Hebel. Our audio producer / bath song composer is Charlotte Martin, and our video editors / Buckland Realtors are Simon Nelson and Mike DeGan.
And special thanks go to the Amon Sûl Facebook group for conversation, inspiration, and the occasional sermonette on the baptismal ramifications of the bath song. I am your host, Father Anthony Cook, and even though Father Andrew receives a proposal for a new halfling ablution hymnography podcast every time he hears me say it, this has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.